Welcome to KC Cares. We're the voice of Kansas City nonprofits. We share the stories of local nonprofits and the individuals who drive them. At KC Cares, we connect the nonprofit and business sectors to enhance the quality of life in Kansas City for both residents and visitors. This KC Cares segment was brought to you by the Ewing Marion Kaufman Foundation, www.kaufman.org. I'm Ruth Baum-Biggis. We live in a digital world. We use our smartphones to communicate with family and friends, even business associates, follow news, look at trends, and use it as a camera and much more. And that's just our smartphones. And there are so many other tools and applications out there. So what does it mean to be digitally literate? And how do we play in the space? Well, joining us for this KC Cares Ask the Expert episode is Deacon, and he is Managing Director of KC Digital Drive, a nonprofit focused on making Kansas City a digital leader. Welcome, Aaron. We're so glad to have you.
Thanks so much, Ruth. I'm glad to be here. Excited to talk.
Well, for folks who may not be aware of KC Digital Drive, tell us what you are and what you do.
Yeah, so our mission is to make Kansas City a digital leader, to improve quality of life and increase economic opportunities for all the people in the region. We really serve as the regional hub for the technology, inclusion, and innovation ecosystems. And that's one interesting thing, because we really believe strongly that both those ecosystems need to work together. As you point out, it is a digital world, and it's an increasingly digital world, and that sort of capacity that is not naturally baked into our civic institutions. So we work across sectors to combine expertise in emerging tech, which is usually specialized, right? I mean, that's entrepreneurs, it's researchers, it's technologists, it's people who are kind of on the cutting edge of new technology, and we work to align those with the needs of the greater Kansas City region. Identifying solutions and project opportunity that have really unique value specific to the partners that we work with.
KC Digital Drive has an interesting precursor to being founded. Tell us how this all came about and the need for what you all do.
Yeah, I mean, it really dates back to 2011, 2012, when Google Fiber chose Kansas City as their pilot market. We didn't have anything to do with that. Some people are like, "Oh, you guys helped bring Google Fiber to Kansas City." Not, I guess we helped some on the implementation, but we had nothing to do with actually attracting them. But it raised a really interesting civic question. And we saw a whole bunch of energy at a grassroots level in the community. A lot of people that were really excited, that maybe knew what fiber was, that had an idea of what gigabit speeds could bring. And you saw this, really across all sectors and organizations, not super broad within an organization, maybe like at a hospital, there might be one or two people like, "Oh man, what's this going to mean? This is really exciting. We want to see this." And then also at a civic level. At sort of the mayor's office, the city manager's office, you had interesting stories too. And I don't know how much you want to get into this, but the Kansas City, Kansas and the Kansas City, Missouri story, sort of even before Digital Drive, was interesting under Mayor Reardon. And at the time, it was Mayor Funkhauser, but it was really Cindy Serco, who was the mayor pro tem, and Rick Usher, who was an assistant city manager. And, in Kansas City, Missouri, they had like a Google Doc with 120 different members that were really feeding into this. So you really saw the community energy, and you had, Kansas City, Kansas is a little bit smaller, pretty tight. And Joe and Pam Curtis, I think, really kind of drove that process. So you had like two different processes that came together to land the deal. But then there was this question, and there was I was involved with the Social Media Club of Kansas City at the time on the board, and was I remember distinctly we did like a Thursday happy hour out at Community America Ballpark, and there were people from both Kansas City, Missouri. Rick Usher was there, and Brent Miles, who was with the Economic Development Department in KCK, UG, was there, and like, we don't know for sure what to do next. We're gonna rely on the community to help drive what we build off of this, and so that was kind of the start.
So you have this great technology that came in with Google Fiber. Sounds like it was an inspiration. So, how did you go about then creating KC Digital Drive and as a nonprofit to boot? How did that all kind of weave together?
Yeah, I mean, it was probably a 1 to 2 year process. You know, at first, and it was really through Social Media Club on sort of I mean, that was we had maybe 2 or 3 thousand members, so we had
Wow.
access to this network of people who were pretty techy or tech interested and also civically oriented. And so we just kind of we heard that question posed at happy hour, and we're like, there were a handful of us who were like, well, we can help answer that. There's kind of a call to action. Let's respond to the call to action. So this is where you see civic leadership putting out the call. You've got people on the ground. They're like, okay, well, so we put together a day-long workshop. It was called Building the Gigabit City. It was down at the Kansas City Public Library. Worked a lot with a guy named Mike Brown, who had a consulting company called Brain Zooming, still does, still work with him, in fact. Joe Cox was leading Social Media Club at the time. We met every week for a few months and put on what was still a really, I think was a great event, and it got a lot of national publicity. Mike's group put together like a 125-page report out that was sort of, here's a big kind of imaginative ideas of here's how this infrastructure could impact the city. Interesting that there was a whole section on that about how it could make the Chiefs and Royals better. And I don't know that Google Fiber really made the Chiefs and Royals better, but it is interesting that in the decade since they've both won championships. So, it was a lot of creativity. It was a lot of fun. And I think the happy hour was in July or August. We ended up holding this event. There were about 125 people there. It went from like 8 to 5. Pretty dynamic, and people left pretty excited. We did that in, I think, October. So it was pretty short. Like, we were able to pull it together over a pretty quick timeline. And I think on like the week before we had that event, the mayors had announced that they'd put a task force together. The Mayor's Bi-State Innovations team was chaired by Mike Burke and Ray Daniels, who ended up being the co-founders of KC Digital Drive. So there were a couple learnings from that. One was like, look how much community energy out there is that we can tap into for these sort of emerging technology, uncertain questions that we don't know quite what to do with, and there is a civic need for. And also, look how much faster we can do it, because government doesn't always move that fast. And it wasn't just like, man, we put together this whole workshop. I mean, it was hundreds of hours of work that went into putting that kind of together and output. I've seen government task forces before, and some of them are good and some of them are bad, but there's no guarantee that they're going to, solve or fix the issue. So sort of the ability of the community to be a meaningful input and the speed at which we could do it were two pieces. The third thing was my background is in private sector consulting, innovation strategy, product management, market research. We had a whole set of tools that we would apply for private sector companies who came with similar problems. Hey, I've got a new product. I want to put it out into the market. How do we do that? What do people want? How do you respond to, what the customer need is? Like, how do you think about customer experience? And it was like, oh, they don't really have these tools in the public sector in the same way. So it was kind of those three things that I think sort of started a little bit more concretely down the path of I would say first it was, well, there's civic capacity that we don't have. And we should have it. And I don't know what that means. Does that mean that government adapts? Does that mean that other civic organizations adapt? Does that mean we need something new? That was sort of the 1 or 2 year process. I will say maybe another thing that was interesting is how quickly you can be perceived as an expert in a field that no one knows anything about. So like, we did this thing. I didn't know that much about fiber. I had a couple telco clients in the past, so it wasn't complete mystery. But like, I had to do not even a lot of research on what it is that we were talking about. To be like, oh, okay, here's, you know, here are some of the possibilities. Here are some of the questions we should be asking. Here is some of the framing we put on this event. And then all of a sudden, like, TV news stations are calling me like, oh, well, can you tell us what Google's do? Like, well, this is weird. Aren't there other people out there? But then you start to talk to people and it's like, oh, well, you spend some time. And this is just me as a citizen of the region who's, got some skills and can do some things, but also like I cared, and was willing to invest. And it was sort of like, oh, you start looking around and seeing other places where this happens too. I will, use the example of like Matt Staub and David Johnson, who were working on the Kansas City streetcar at a kind of similar time. And it's like, these are just two guys that come to our, social media club meetings sometimes, and they're really passionate about transit. And like, they're really smart about it, and they can go out and talk to people and do things and then kind of become, the experts. So like, it was interesting to think about how do you create a platform to where people can bring their expertise and their passion for improving the community to bear. And, when you look at
digital
transformation and emerging technology, there's going to keep being a new thing that no one's an expert.
Oh yeah.
And so this was sort of the, I guess, like the thinking behind it, more practically speaking. I kind of started, I showed up to the mayor's bi-state innovation team meetings. I wasn't part of the mayoral appointed task force, but I showed up enough and people talked to me enough behind that sort of like, eventually I was invited up to the table and giving reports at the meetings. I'm like, oh, what's happening with neighborhoods, or what's happening here? And, well, you should maybe come to this thing, and kind of, first started getting invited to things, and eventually was engaged. There was another guy who kind of drove, that is probably more, or certainly more business oriented than I was, in terms of like, no, if you're going to do this, you should have a contract to do this. Someone needs to hire you. Dave Sandel, a guy out of St. Louis. So he put together a contract, and I worked with him. So we were kind of hired by Mid-America Regional Council, who was staffing the bi-state effort. And we were engaged to help Mark put together a playbook, which was called, I think, America's Digital Crossroads. That sort of lined out not a prescriptive set of things that we need to do, but sort of a menu of opportunities for the region in this kind of digital transformation, internet economy space, for how we might leverage the opportunity that was created by a private technology company building out, we didn't know for sure at the time, but somewhere between $100 million and $1 billion of private infrastructure that no one really knew what to do with or had been thinking about 6 months prior. And one of the recommendations sort of through that process was, gosh, there really needs to be a place for this stuff to live. It's kind of a weird mix of things. It's really broad in some ways. It's got, an emerging tech focus. It's got sort of this innovation piece, but also this inclusion, and access piece. And, we thought about a lot of the different places that it might live, but it kind of felt like it needs to be a new thing, which at first was just a brand and an initiative. I worked out of Mid-America Regional Council for a couple of years, but after a couple of years, sort of within that framework, which and Mark does so many great things, and is similar in that they're broad, and touch a lot of different sectors and a lot of parts of the community, but less engaged sort of specifically in the emerging tech space and in this kind of like entrepreneurial, let's go out and pilot and try things. It's a little bit different than how they work. And they're sort of very responsive to a broad set of stakeholders, need to move a little bit slower and be fairly deliberate in how they engage. And so in late 2013, working with, at the time it was Dave Rao in Mayor James' office and Pam Curtis in Mayor Reardon's office. It's like, do you think this needs to spin out? And they're like, yeah, it seems like it's time. And Mike and Ray, Mike Burke and Ray Daniels I think they committed to a 6-month stint to chair a mayor's task force, and they were on our board for I think 5 years. So they really went above and beyond in terms of how they invested in the project. But that's not surprising if you knew either of them. Mike passed away a few years ago, but gosh, they're just great civic servants.
We're talking with Aaron Deacon, KC Digital Drive. So it becomes a nonprofit with a mission. How have you been carrying out that mission?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I should have looked this up because a few years ago I sort of went through stages of the ecosystem development, which was an interesting exercise, and I don't think we fully memorialized it yet. I don't know if it is memorializable exactly, but we had kind of a few different things at the outset. I mean, we always have much more than a few different things, and so we always are juggling a bunch of stuff, and it's sometimes makes it hard for people to know what to do with us. But on the one hand, both like thinking about the innovation and inclusion ecosystems as complementary to each other is a challenge, right? And so sometimes you get really either pressed to focus on one or the other, or if you're engaged in both, the people who know you in one place don't really understand you in the other. So you might have people in like the entrepreneurial or innovation ecosystem who think like, oh, you're just the digital inclusion folks, or in the sort of inclusion and access and opportunity space who think like, well, yeah, you guys work with entrepreneurs, but you don't do this. So that's kind of a through line, I think, of marrying those two things. A little bit more sort of like historical. There was this idea that we have one technology that's coming into the community, and at huge scale, and that's Google Fiber, right? And a lot of public attention. So when you look at how that innovation inclusion dynamic manifests, on the one hand, we want to make sure that this infrastructure is deployed widely, because they came in with a business model that didn't guarantee they were going to build that every place. So one thing that we're focusing on is how do we engage with neighborhoods, do work on the ground, build real relationships, work with the schools and the healthcare institutions to make sure that we get broad distribution of the technology. On the other hand, we want to work with startups. We're holding hackathons. We're doing startup competitions and judging things and networking with people all around the country who are like, how do you build out future technology? Even back as far as 2011, 12, we're working with people who are imagining AR, VR applications and hyperscaled cloud computing. Those were some of the kind of immediate tactics, and it was really oriented around Google. And a lot of people thought, well, you're the Google organization, you're the nonprofit that's helping Google, or maybe you're all about gigabit, you're all about fiber, and all of that was true. But we knew that would be a point in time, in some sense, and that what was really interesting, what the opportunity for Kansas City really was to kind of to think about that in the context of gigabit fiber internet and broadband and connectivity, but also that there were going to be new things, that wasn't going to be the last thing. And so all of this that we're doing, there's going to be another technology that comes on top of this, and it's going to be its own emergent ecosystem that's going to need its own attention, and is also going to need to be thinking about how to do it inclusively and how to do it in a way that tickles the attention of the entrepreneurs and the researchers and the innovators who are really building the next thing. So if the first phase was our kind of gigabit fiber and entrepreneurial ecosystem part, say there was maybe like a 3-year window where we shifted a little bit in terms of the nomenclature to a concept called smart cities. This was I mean, there was a concrete project where the Kansas City, Missouri in particular, built this out along the streetcar line around the same time, put in a whole bunch of technology, sensors, heightened connectivity. We are still pretty active in that space. I'm going to a smart cities event in New Orleans today to talk to other cities about digitalization and transformation. So, but these things kind of ebb and flow a little bit too, and sometimes the brand gets hot for a little bit, and people frame the conversation in that way. I mean, it's funny, there's people still at these conferences will have these existential questions. Well, what is a smart city? What do we mean when we say smart cities? And it can be everything from, sensors on the block to, having a coffee shop in your small town that people can come and, build a creative economy. So things get really broad. Like when you look at the breadth of content, it's funny how the terms and the brands work. So there was definitely kind of a smart city phase that went through maybe 2017, 18. I think in some version of this, I've had another piece in there, but 2020 was COVID, and it was interesting. For us, I would say in some ways this was a bookend to the Google project, because even though COVID wasn't COVID wasn't a new technology per se, and some of the work that we ended up doing even stretched a bit in our digital engagement. But it was certainly new. It was sudden. It was unexpected. It was an environment of information scarcity, and an environment where there were a lot of things to do all of a sudden that weren't anyone's job to do. And that required collaboration across a lot of sectors and institutions that maybe didn't work together all the time, which were all things that sort of part of our kind of toolkit. To your question of how, like that we think about when we look at new tech, because these are places that pop up out of nowhere where expertise is kind of scarce. There's some stuff that needs to be done. It's unclear what the ROI is. Nobody knows if it's a good idea. It doesn't quite live any place. So we ended up doing quite a bit of things that I never thought we would do, and maybe were hard to justify. Although, especially in that first year or two, I think everyone was doing things that were hard to justify just because that's what you needed to do. But ranging from kind of working to set up a mass vaccination facility in Platte County to working on some of the interoperability data pieces. With the health departments. There was some stuff that was more in our tech wheelhouse in terms of like digital contact tracing apps. We owned or leased a vaccine van that went around and delivered vaccines. We helped to spearhead. We worked with Mark Logan on a project called Comeback KC, which was a regional branding effort. So there were a bunch of things that were these kind of weird cross-sector. How do we address this problem? Also similar, in our kind of origin to, there were a lot of people just out in the community who were like all kind of, I think as Mark says, running in the same direction, trying to figure out how they could help. Ryan Mulligan, who was at Blue KC at the time, was another one who was really, what is the regional strategic response to this? So I mean, that was an interesting application of a lot of the sort of tools and capabilities and approach that we had developed in a little bit of a different domain. But I'd say, in the few years since, has really helped us to think about how to tell the story of who we are and what we are differently. And I would say, the few years since then has been, we've got this whole way of working and set of capabilities that people really understand and value in a sort of emergency response, or we didn't know we needed this, or someone has used the phrase surge capacity, which is I think all true, but like, how do we do that where we're not waiting for an emergency? And can we deploy sort of this capability and resources in a bit more of a strategic and thoughtful, forward-looking way, which we do on a project by project basis, but I don't know that we're always understood that way, and we don't, always have the time or the resources to do that to the extent that we'd like. So I think that's our kind of current state.
We have just a couple of minutes left. how can nonprofits connect with you so that they're part of the game in making Kansas City a truly, digital community?
Yeah, that's a great question. Programmatically, we do work across all sectors. We work with entrepreneurs, we work with universities, we work with local government, and we kind of try to build out a value proposition for those different stakeholder sets that is really specific to what they need. And we have a couple of those that are focused on the nonprofit and community-based organization sector. One is something called the Community Technology Action Network, and CTAN for short. And we just had a meeting yesterday, actually, and the CTAN is a member network for community organizations and human service nonprofits, and basically it serves to connect the members of that network to both the broader technology and innovation ecosystems, and then also identify projects that fit their needs and interests. So, we heard from them. I think one of the first projects that we did within that network was an AI for nonprofits class. We are working on a resource fair. We've got a hackathon coming up this summer. Through Code for KC, which is our kind of developer-facing volunteer arm, and in conjunction with the Kansas City Developers Conference, where we're going to be building, potential solutions alongside nonprofits to use technology to address some of their needs. And then another network actually that kind of came out of this is something called the Digital Life Exchange, and that is more on the inclusion side of things. It's some of the same organizations, but where the Community Technology Action Network is really meant as an interchange between sort of the community organizations and the innovation work that's happening in the community, and also a project, sort of a project creation engine. The Digital Life Exchange is really based on the fact that we have a lot of human services organizations that have client relationships that are really specific to how a certain population's needs are manifest, whether it's refugee populations or reentry populations or different ethnic groups or religious groups. And increasingly, they're all seeing barriers in technology to how they fulfill their mission. Whether the people they serve don't have internet, they don't have computers at home, they don't know how to use them. Maybe they don't know what to do with AI. Maybe they're scared of AI. Maybe they're thinking about, should I get a Google headset or a Meta headset? And some of these issues are more pressing than others, but some of them are really existential for these organizations' missions. And so the Digital Life Exchange or DLX is really a way to help them share. We don't need to build a lot of new organizational capacity just to teach digital skills necessarily. We do need some, and we've got some organizations that are stepping into that gap, but not everyone's going to do that. And so we need to be able to connect the people who have the population and who have the need with the organizations that can fulfill it, and figure out how to be smart about how we maximize our resources, because there's not enough out there. There's not enough money to buy computers for everyone who needs it. There's not enough training hours to train everyone who needs it. And if we just try to do that disconnected and have to rebuild the case management function, it's going to be a much longer road. It probably won't be successful. And so the Digital Life Exchange is designed to help meet that need.
That's great. Audience, go to kcdigitaldrive.org. Check out all this stuff. We're coming up. You've got to be part of the game. So, Aaron, thank you so much for sharing everything that you all do and how we're moving forward. It's very exciting times, as you say. There's not maybe enough resource for everybody to have all the fun tools, but there's a way to work with others, which is great. And we're so glad you're here.
Thank you. This is really exciting. I really enjoyed talking with you and appreciate the opportunity to share.
Thank you for joining us for KC Cares, Kansas City's nonprofit voice. We're produced by a nonprofit called Charitable Communications. This KC Cares segment was brought to you by the Ewing Marion Kaufman Foundation, www.kaufman.org. Now, if you'd like to be a guest on KC Cares, check out our website, kccaresonline.org. And spread the love. You'll find us on Facebook and Twitter at Casey Cares Radio and Instagram at Casey Cares Online. And don't forget, you can catch us on Saturday mornings at 8 a.m. on ESPN, 1510 a.m. and 94.5 FM. Thank you for joining us for Casey Cares.